Hello YouTube, I hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to talk to you about one of my favorite sort of characters out there, Conan the Barbarian and Robert E. Howard. I actually talk about him extensively in a video I just published. I'll go ahead and link to you in that in the video below. Very quickly, Robert E. Howard wrote tons of stories in the 20s, 30s, and before he committed suicide. In the 30s, he was a very prolific writer, wrote a ton of stuff. By far, his most enduring creation is Conan the Barbarian, who has certainly had a big impact. He is an incredibly important character. He's not the only character that that Robert E. Howard puts together and writes. There are many others out there, but Conan is certainly the one that certainly hit the home run. Many copycats followed. Conan is still around in video games, movies, comics, and stuff. So he's still with us today as a character and probably will be moving forward. We are in Conan's world, and we're all just trying to survive. So if you want to check out my video below where I talk about sort of how I think that Conan really speaks to a modern audience, and why the central conflict is there, feel free to take a look at that video below. In the meanwhile, what I also wanted to do to you today, right after I recorded that, in fact, I'm actually wearing the same stuff. It was literally, I just hit the stop button for that one and hit the start one, hit it again, is to do a review of my favorite Conan story. Again, as part of this channel, what I do is I unpack for you a number of sort of classics that are sort of forgotten in fantasy, science fiction, and horror. So today I want to take a look at my favorite story by Robert E. Howard in the Conan sort of mythos, and that's Beyond the Black River. Now, Beyond the Black River is also one of the longest, so I'm going to do that right up front. If you're going to commit to it, you're going to commit to it, and so forth. It's also very Robert E. Howard. And Robert E. Howard, when he writes, he's a great writer, but he can sometimes be very, very visible about race. He's very cognizant of race as a writer in the 30s and 40s, as in the 20s, as a white guy would. During his era, he sees race. He writes about race, and so forth. And so sometimes when you read something of his, you need to put on your "this is 100 years ago" hat, because if you read it with modern sort of eyes, that you're thinking, misogyny, racism, and stuff aren't good, and yet here are characters that are engaging in the stories. So just up front, just to make sure you're aware of it, that is the thing that he definitely errs on, particularly when it comes to race. Now, Robert E. Howard's weird when it comes to race. There are times when he'll champion races, like, for example, he has written many a story that champions sort of Native Americans and such, that sort of nobility, but there are also many times when he won't, and he has stories, for example, that are so yellow peril that when you go and read them, you're like, ugh, I'm not comfortable reading that. And you won't see any of those stories popping up in my channel either. I'm not going to be recommending, a yellow peril story that he wrote where all the bad guys are Asian characters, particularly Chinese ones, who have these, stereo Fu Manchu stereotypes that are just incredibly uncomfortable. We are not going to be, reviewing any of those for you. I don't even like him that much anyway. So that's who he is, just so you understand. And that's not, unfortunately, that was not uncommon for writers during that time, particularly since most of the readers would have been white people during that time, particularly white men of fantasy and science fiction and horror works, and of the magazines. So most of your writers tend to be those three things too. And so as a result, they're going to have the various biases of the world, and they're not going to tend to challenge them. And when they do, it's going to be looser challenging than you might expect. So anyway, but today I want to take a look at Beyond the Black River, which I love, by Robert E. Howard, who H.P. Lovecraft called Two Gun Bob. So I'm going to be referring to him as Two Gun Bob because that's my favorite nickname for him, probably any writer ever. So I like to do that when I talk about him in my stories. So Two Gun Bob wrote this story, and I consider it to be the best Conan story ever written. So let's take a look at why. In the story, and again, I don't want to give you too many spoilers, but I try to keep my reviews spoiler free. It's hard to do with most stories, so I'll typically give you just first couple of chapters if it's a novel or something like that. But when it's a long short story or a novella, particularly one where there are some fun endings, it's hard not to do. It's also, but again, a lot of people want to go to something new, and I don't want to have me spoiler up everything. So I'm not going to have super spoilers on it, but it's hard to review this particular story without doing spoilers. Just so you're aware. So we're actually starting out in this sort of fort that's been set up by these colonists from this local kingdom that are colonizing this region. They've been there for about at least a generation or two. They've got a lot of farming around them. The infrastructure really seems to be in place. And so forth. And there's a local sort of tribe of people called the Picts that have been raiding and have been sort of the major struggle by this fort. Conan arrives to the fort that's there by this nation, and he is given a task basically to help with some other folks that have been recruited to kind of go out, explore, take out some of the Picts, get some more information on what's happening from the Pict area and so forth. So basically they're just going to go to beyond the Black River, which is kind of the border between their land and Pict land, and then kind of check in on it and so forth. That's basically the storyline. Ultimately, you're going to find out that there's an invasion that's coming, it happens, and then you're going to find out what happens after the invasion hits. And it's going to change the world. It's going to be pretty fun. Lots of fun stuff are going to happen. But what really makes this work is the character building and the world building that Robert E. Howard does. And he really has a lot of fun characters in here. And hey, look, this is a fantasy story. Not all the characters are going to survive. You just understand that going in. But he has some great character building, and he also has some amazing world building. One of the things I love about Robert E. Howard is he's such a strong writer. And for example, there's going to be this scene, and it's one of my favorite scenes that he ever writes, where this monster is entering the Pict village where Conan is. And it's going to be there to eat some people that have been captured by the Picts and so forth, that some of his men. And this, he writes like almost a page that describes this hugely unnatural beast with this feral roar that just kind of resonated with you. And if you're a modern reader like myself, going in and reading this story for the first time, I thought that it was like some sort of like Cthulhu. I mean, this is like the same sort of a description you might see for something like a description for like a Cthulhian character or something, or from the Cthulhu mythos or something like that. And I think this sort of dark aberration that lost the time that time should have forgotten but didn't, and so forth. And so he has this amazing description of its fangs and its teeth and its claws and its collar and size and so forth, and its feral roar. And then you realize, as you get almost to the end of the description, he's just describing a saber-toothed tiger. He's spent like a page and a half just describing a saber-toothed tiger, but he's described it so well and so darkly and so richly that you're like, holy crap, that must be a really, you can understand where he's coming from and so forth and why he has this saber-toothed tiger. But I mean, in most fantasy, modern fantasy, a saber-toothed tiger is like a modern creature. He's in like your monster manual for Dungeons and Dragons. He's in your basic stuff. He's saber-toothed tiger is even in Magic the Gathering. It's just a 2/1 creature with first strike. It's not anything major for you to deal with. It's the same power and toughness and abilities as a hornet cobra. It's not a creature of. It's not something that's big or hard to deal with. It's just something But here it is. There's a central bad guy in this story, and Robert E. Howard plays it so well. You don't even see it coming. He writes it so well. And again, it's one of my favorite action scenes in pretty much anybody's ever written in fantasy. It's just incredibly well detailed, and this monster. And so I think that, again, he has this way of crafting a world and the characters and so forth. And again, I won't spoil the ending with you. I only told you some of the basic plot lines or what happens afterwards and how it kind of shifts the balance of power in the world. But it's important. And again, it's a very good story, Beyond the Black River. If you've heard of it, please feel free to I'd love to talk to you more about it in the comments below. If you haven't, check it out. Again, I'll give you also a link to the comments below in case you just want to pick it up quickly and take a look at it. I'm not sure if it's on, I'll do a little bit of research after I do this video before I post it, if it's available for free. Sometimes some of Robert E. Howard's stuff is available for free. There's sort of this copyright trademark issue with Robert E. Howard. Some people think that his stuff is now in the public domain, and some people don't. And so there's this kind of issue as to whether it is or isn't. So there are people who own the Conan and some of other of Two Gun Bob's IPs, like Solomon Kane and so forth. That's Paradox over in Sweden, if I remember correctly, owns it. But it's also possible that, at the end of the day, it might be out there, and there are some places so I'll take a look, see if it's available on like a Project Gutenberg somewhere for you to read it. If not, I'll just link you to like an Amazon book or something so you can buy it. Typically, it's going to be in a collection. It's longer because it's more novella length than a short story, but it's good, and I think it's just so evocative and stuff. So if you've read it, let me know what you think of it. If not, check it out and let me know. Anything in there that you disagree with? Do you agree or disagree with my sort of thoughts on the book? I'd love to engage you more, talk with you more about it. Let's unpack that. Have that conversation about that. Once again, if you like this video, there's no reason for you not to hit that subscribe button, because there's going to be so many more to follow. And once again, hey, I appreciate you taking some time out of your day. If you spent 10 minutes with me, man, it was just, I really do appreciate it. We all have busy lives and busy things that are happening in our lives, and for you to spend that time with me, I appreciate that. So once again, thank you so much. You have a great day.